Welcome back to the Ohio Business Podcast. I'm your host, Stephen Pohl. Today we are joined with Lyle Solomon of Oakview Law Group. Thanks for coming on, Lyle.
Thank you very much for having me, Stephen.
Yes, and Lyle is a principal attorney at Oakview, and he is in California, Auburn, correct? Auburn, California?
Actually, Auburn is our county seat. I'm in Roseville, which is between Auburn and Sacramento.
Well, Lyle is the first attorney on the podcast and the first California resident on the podcast. But once again, thanks for coming on. How about you kind of give us kind of an overview of what you practice and just a little background on yourself.
Great. Well, I've been a practicing attorney in California for 18 years, in working in law practices for just 30 years this year. My practice is limited to civil litigation, mostly with an emphasis on consumer debt. My position right now with Oakview Law Group is working with establishing procedures and dealing with debt resolution for our clients.
And can you give us a background on kind of your journey on becoming an attorney? Because I have some friends that was looking into it. I think it's an interesting, just an interesting journey. Can you just kind of give us a perspective on yours?
Okay. Well, first off, I had the desire to be an attorney since I was in high school. I think my earliest recollection of that was probably 15 or 16 years old. I decided that was something I was interested in, which amazes my parents because at the time I didn't personally know anybody who was an attorney. My exposure to it was from TV, which is very, very, as it turns out, very, very different from what the actual life is. And as I said, I've been in law practices now. This is coming up on 30 years, but I didn't start there. And that's one thing that I've encouraged people is for a lot of people that I went to law school with, becoming an attorney was a second career. I didn't start law school. I was 40 years old when I entered my first law school course. So prior to that, I had done a lot of different things, worked at different things, trying to make the decision that I could actually go to law school and do that. It was and this is the part where some people say, oh my gosh, I don't want to do that. It was a 10-year journey for me to get my education. I started my first class in undergrad shortly after my 30th birthday, and I graduated from law school 97, so just a few days after my 40th. So I need to amend that. I started law school in my mid-30s, but I graduated just after, shortly before my 41st birthday. And that led to the fact that most 40-year-olds are not being sought as entry-level associates by large firms. So I've always worked as a sole practitioner, meaning that I don't have employees. I'm not employed by a large firm. I do on occasion partner with other attorneys, other sole practitioners, or other firms when working on cases, depending on what they are. But for the most part, I work independently. And that was one of the big draws for me in becoming an attorney, is as a sole practitioner, I have some, I don't have total because I'm at the mercy of courts and clients, but I have some control, and a lot more control than I did when I was an employee at large corporations, at large and small businesses, where I had to answer to an immediate boss. When I started law school, or actually when I started undergrad, my thought was that I would go into criminal law, maybe work in a district attorney's office, and then maybe do criminal defense work. However, about halfway through my undergrad, I went to work in a friend's law office, and his practice was strictly civil. And at that time, it was strictly personal injury. And I became fascinated with the process of civil law. I don't like, or I didn't really like personal injury very much, and I try not to do it. But there are many other aspects of civil law, and the biggest aspect that I deal with is most of my clients are small businesses, small to large businesses, and some individuals who have contract disputes with other people. So it may sound dry, but at times it can get very interesting. And as you go digging into things, I spend a good portion of my time in court. That's hence my dress today. I will be going into court later this afternoon on a small matter, but I spend, I know attorneys that never get into a courtroom, and there are many, many different aspects of what you can do as an attorney and with a law degree. When I graduated from law school, the figure was that 1/3 of all law school graduates did not pursue or get a law license and did not actually practice law as most people consider an attorney does. But it is a good basis for other opportunities. I've seen it a lot. I have classmates who are in legislatures, classmates who are lobbyists. I have classmates who are in city government. I also have classmates who spend their time advising on corporate boards and to municipalities. One of my favorite classmates has been for years the general counsel to a school district. I can't remember, in talking with her, she probably can't remember the last time she was actually in a courtroom, but she's dealing with legal issues related to that district every single day. So I hope, if you have more questions, if you'd like to know something more specific, I'm happy to answer, but that's the general overview of both where I'm at and the things that I see.
Now, you said that kind of your typical client is going to be a small business of that sorts. What's a usual or typical kind of situation that you would see that you would work with?
Right now, I do a lot of collection. Right now I work in the debt resolution area with Oakview Law Group. So there I'm in an advisory capacity for the most part. I review process. I work with writing articles on financial matters, especially related to consumer debt. With other clients, I worked with very recently a small concrete company that family business, been in operation for 45 years. And they called me one day and they were being sued by 16 different creditors. And that had happened because and this was a while back, this was in the recession of around 2008 when I started with them. And what had happened is that two of their largest customers, who were on a 30-day pay for all their invoices, had both filed bankruptcy. And suddenly that monthly income from those two customers had gone away. And when it went away, suddenly my clients were in a position where they weren't able to pay their bills. And so it took us, so I worked with them in dealing with the attorneys that represented their creditors and getting them about. So that is very typical in dealing with my small business clients is when there's a problem like that, and where they have to respond to somebody suing them, whether it be for non-payment or for non-performance. I also, with those same clients, have had to go pursue people who aren't paying their bills, and pursue, those that would breach their contract and not perform.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a lot of breach of contract work at the base of the problem, or the base of the issue, with variations throughout.
Now, you touched on, you mentioned the recession, and when you think of consumer debt, you really think about, '08. Was that a crazy time for your practice, or just, for your specialty in general? Can you kind of touch on that time period?
It was a very crazy time. A typical, I would make a call on behalf of my client to a subcontractor, and I would get the call. I would call and say, "Hey, look, you have outstanding bills. I thought I'd give you a call before I go file suit." And the typical response was, "Well, the developer, the builder, the owner builder, whoever it was their ultimate customer, hadn't paid, had either lost their ability to pay, and due to loss of a job, or loss of a portfolio." And so it was very much a snowball effect, and it was very crazy. '08 was the largest, well, from '08 to about 10, even some trickle into up to 2012, was the largest number of bankruptcy filings I have ever seen in my life. And in fact, talking with other creditors, attorneys, and talking with staff at the bankruptcy court in Sacramento, they had never seen such a number of filings. I am saying that I am afraid that we are probably at the beginning of another record number of bankruptcy filings due to the pandemic and the economic effects of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you're starting to, are you starting to see more bankruptcies now? Now that kind of the stimulus is kind of wearing away, and we're kind of re-entering a post-COVID world?
Yes. I receive, on behalf of a couple of my clients, I receive bankruptcy filing notices every day. It hasn't reached the numbers that I saw in, say, 2010 by any means, but I am receiving more than I was receiving in 2019, and even through the first half of 2020. I think the second half of 2020 is when I started to see that increase.
Mm-hmm. Now, are you seeing it more in specific industries now? I mean, because it seems like the service industry was heavily impacted. Are you starting to see that, or is it kind of a broad, a lot of businesses are kind of facing this problem?
Well, a lot of businesses are experiencing it. Yeah, I think it's across the board. If I was to say that I saw a specific industry hitting a high, I would target, or I would mention two industries, and those are the service industry and the retail industry.
Mm-hmm.
Retailers that have relied heavily, if not solely, on brick and mortar for their businesses are on an increase, and I expect to see them on an increase, as well as service industries that were not able to function at full volume during the last 12 to 16 months.
Mm-hmm. Now, I kind of started this podcast during COVID, I think right before it, like February. So I always like to ask how how did COVID kind of affect your practice?
Well, our meeting today is a prime example of how it has affected my practice. I went from being physically in a courtroom probably 4 times a week on average to being in a courtroom, physically in a courtroom, maybe once a month. Every court, or almost every court that I deal with in Northern California, and actually throughout the state of California, has adopted some form of remote access. And some of them have stated that they're going to continue with it. I've got at least 3 courts in my immediate area that have found Zoom to be such a time-saving mechanism for them that they have sent out notices that certain hearings will only be conducted by Zoom from going forward. So for me, that's a great, while I have people that say, oh, I'd rather be physically in front of the judge. I remind them that the trade-off is that I can be in 3 different courts at basically the same time using the technology. And I've had that happen where I'm sitting here with a laptop, a tablet, and a phone, all by video or by a combination of video and audio, and able to cover those without essentially leaving my house. So that's been a good thing. The first few months of COVID were I think the hardest, because nobody in my industry or very few people in my industry, I can't say nobody, because there are some that have been using technology such as this for years, but very few were ready when COVID hit and we had stay-at-home orders. I mean, California was, I believe, the first state with a stay-at-home order. And we had counties, such as in our Bay Area, San Francisco and others, that were as much as a week or 2 ahead of the state's order. And so that slammed the door on things, stopped things in their tracks. And that is one of the things I was discussing yesterday. Is one of the consequences of all this is that I'm now seeing larger delays in my court cases. And I have one case that I have my fingers crossed that will go to trial in August, but this is, in the last 14 months, I believe, the 6th time that we have an actual date for starting our trial. And hopefully August, there won't be any further delay in doing that. So it's had an impact in how I do work. The economic impact, I think, was basically the first 2 or 3 months while adapting to the new norm, or the COVID norm that we had to deal with.
So are you kind of expecting a logjam from cases that were delayed, and then expecting more cases coming up in the future because of possible future bankruptcies?
I do expect to see that the bankruptcy courts will again experience a logjam. I don't get into bankruptcy court very often. Excuse me, it's not an area that I practice in regularly, but I have had to go there with some of my clients in pursuing their claims. The place that I will see the big logjam is in our state courts, because they have to deal with not just the civil claims and cases that attorneys like I bring, but they also have to deal with the criminal matters. And in some of our courts, some of the counties that around me, they haven't had jury trials going for the majority of the time, for all of 2020. And some of them didn't start jury trials until after January of 2021, which that means that the way the courts work and the way the law in California is written, criminal trials have priority. then it's, then it goes in varying degrees. And my civil cases, my civil trials have the lowest priority on that list. So the logjam may not be entirely from civil cases, but we will be affected because of criminal cases finally getting into courtrooms and getting in front of juries.
And you kind of touched on how Zoom has, changed your practice. Do you see any other industry trends going forward, either with technology advancing? Do you see anything in the horizon that is going to affect you and maybe potentially the law industry as a whole?
Well, I think that the video technology and the remote access technology such as Zoom is going to continue to have an effect on the law practice of law. I am hoping that more attorneys will follow some of the court's lead and adopt the use of Zoom or other remote technology in some of our procedures. I hear reports of hate it and love it from other attorneys. And like I say, for me, it's been a positive for the most part. I can't think of a specific instance since March of last year that I would have rather been in front of a judge on. Now, the difference is that we take depositions all the time in civil cases where we sit down with a witness, have them sworn, and have a court reporter there taking down. And that can be more difficult over Zoom because you don't a lot of times have the opportunity to measure a person in person as you would be able to when you're there in the room with them. I mean, you and I are both able to limit what we see of the other or what is seen. And when I'm in the room with somebody, I can hopefully read a lot more from them than I can over Zoom. So I don't see a lot of attorneys wanting to adopt or continue Zoom for things like depositions or witness statements. But for a lot of procedures, I see it continuing forward, especially with the courts.
That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anything to expedite the process, because it does seem like it is a kind of a drawn out, time consuming thing. So that's good. Now you said that you've been, practicing for, solo practitioner for over 30 years. How did you kind of grow your business to where you are today?
My business has grown strictly from word of mouth. As I said, in my short bio, I was an older student going to law school, and although before I started law school, I went to a couple of friends who were practicing attorneys and said, "Hey, look, I'm going to be in my 40s when I start this. Am I going to be able to be hired?" And both of them were very honest in that they didn't, I may not be hired by a firm, but I would have the opportunity to practice and I would be able to find clients. And with that in mind, once I started law school, I went out and first off, during law school, I had to move for law school. I was in Las Vegas and I graduated from UNLV. And at the time, Nevada didn't have a law school. So that brought me to Northern California for law school. And so I had to find a job. And one of the easiest ways to do that was through temp services. And I specifically sought out assignments in law practices in different offices. And one of the assignments was in a building where it had 2 floors of nothing but sole practitioners. And I got to know every one of them because of that assignment. And I can say that since the time of meeting them, I have worked with every one of those sole practitioners in some capacity since that time. And so they were the basis of my network. Um, and it started with, hey, Lyle, can you do this research? Hey, Lyle, can you look this up while I was, in my time between work and school? And doing those small things for them led to referrals of cases. The first client I ever had was referred by one of those attorneys, and it was a small matter involving his cat. But I was able to, I took it. I was able to get him a positive resolution, and he became a referral source. And so that's where it's been. Is that mine has all been by word of mouth. If I have people call me every week. I'd like to say daily, but I don't think it's ever been daily. But I have people call every week, and whether it's somebody saying, "Hey, Lyle, would you take a look at this for my friend, neighbor, coworker, whoever?" Or, "Hey, Lyle, I got your name and number from this other attorney or this other person." So I don't have the largest practice. I don't have the most lucrative practice in the area, but I do have a practice that that does support me and that keeps me as busy as I want to be.
And that's an important thing, really. Now, do you have any, standout cases, any crazy cases that you've dealt with over your time? I need to know.
There's always something fun.
Yeah.
Always something interesting going on. Let me back up to one of the most memorable prior to getting my law license. While I was in law school, as I said, I was doing little projects for other attorneys. And one of those attorneys had said to me, "Lyle, are you a registered process server? You should be a registered process server." And I looked at it and yeah, that sounded great. And it actually gave me an entrance into several two other lawyers and working with them. But one afternoon, I got a call from a woman that I knew from church, and she said, "Hey, you may know that John and I are getting divorced." And I said, "Yeah, I've heard that." And she says, "And you may know my attorney." And I did know him. And she says, "Well, he recommended you to serve John. We still haven't been able to serve John with our paperwork." I said, "Okay, fine. So what do you need?" And she says, "Well, we have a meeting tonight with our pastor. Would you come and serve John there? I know John will be there." So I pulled into the church parking lot, and she pulled in shortly after, and she said, "Lyle, I really hope to achieve something in our meeting with the pastor. Will you please wait and serve John afterwards?" So I sat and waited in my car, and saw John walk in. And a little while later, I see John walk out. So I got out of the car and with the paperwork in my hand, and John saw me. John and I know each other. And John immediately said, "Oh no," and started running down the sidewalk from the church. Now the church sits on a lot. The back of the lot is a large group of oak trees and then a creek. And so John started running down the sidewalk. It was sprinkling. He was dressed for a meeting with the pastor, not for a run. And he almost slipped 2 or 3 times as I jogged after him because he was heading to the creek. He's not going anywhere.
Yeah.
And as I started running after John, the pastor came out and waved at me and, "Go get him." I chased John down, and as expected, he got into the oak trees beyond the light of the parking lot, and he didn't know he realized he didn't know how far away that creek was. And so he stopped. And I came up to him and handed him the paperwork. And he, he he said a few choices to me. And I reminded him that, I was just doing my job, and I walked away. I got home and my wife says, "How'd things go?" I said, "They went fine." And a few minutes later, my phone rang and it was the pastor. And he said, "Lyle." I said, "Yeah." He says, "Did you catch John?" And I said, "Yep." And he said, "Good," and hung up. So that was a highlight of pre-law practice. In law practice, I have had the opportunity to deal in situations where I had a situation a few years ago where a man kept insisting that things were one way. And he was the opponent, and his attorney kept insisting they were one way. And we got to court for a hearing, and the man got on the stand and to testify on his own behalf. And as he started testifying, my client's smacking me in the knee with her, and she keeps smacking me and leaning over, and "That's not true. That's not true." And I said, "Okay, let's see where he goes." And he just kept talking. And she kept insisting it wasn't true. Well, I finally, we got a chance for a recess, and she says, "Are you going to start asking him questions?" And I said, "Why would I? Everything he said helps us and hurts him." And it was just a matter of, in his mind, he had decided that was the story that would help him best. And it didn't. We got a favorable ruling, and we were able to proceed and have a successful case against him. And I think those are some of the most memorable, whether it's been witness opposing parties, or even a few times a client who decides that they have a story to tell, whether it's the truth or not, but it's what they think is going to help them most. And those always stick out in my mind when I talk with others, that, hey, look, you may think it's the best story that there is, but I happen to know what the law is.
Yeah.
And I'd like you're paying me, so please listen to me and try to follow my advice, so that we don't run into that situation where you just keep digging yourself into a hole by the story you tell.
Yeah, that's why I gotta ask that question, because there's always a good little knowledge nugget. So thank you for that. That was also funny. So for as we kind of wrap up, for any aspiring somebody looking to get into law, do you have any words of wisdom, any things that you wish you knew before you did what you did?
Number one, I wish I had made the decision to go to law school earlier. Like I said, it had been something that I'd been interested in since high school, but just circumstances were that I didn't find the drive and determination to do that immediately after law school or after high school. Number two, do it because it's something you want to do. A classmate of mine I ran into years ago, after we'd been out of school somewhere around 10 years. And she asked me she said that she'd read an article recently that most attorneys experience burnout somewhere in the 10-year range after, in practice. And did I ever experience burnout? And I had to admit that I don't, because I have a very blue collar background, and I know, and if I start thinking, am I, do I not like this anymore? I start thinking about where I could be if I hadn't pursued this. And so it's a matter of pursuing it because it's, number one, a good alternative, but something that I enjoy and something that I wanted to do and was interested in doing, rather than, hey, look, I've had people say, oh, if you're an attorney, you can make X number of dollars a year. Well, I've never seen that figure in my bank account. And that was not the driving factor. And I don't think it should be the driving factor for anybody in doing it. It should be because you enjoy, or you think you will enjoy it. The other piece of advice is get some exposure first. Like I said, I went and talked, before I even started a class, I went and talked with two different friends who have two very different law practices and got their perspective on it and talked with them about it. And then once I got into school about it, I found a way to go to work in the field. Just a quick note on that. Years ago, when my son was trying to decide what to do with himself, he came to me and said, "Dad, I'm thinking about law school. What do you think about that?" And I said, "If you're thinking about it, then I suggest you get some real exposure to it, get some practical experience in it." And so he did. He decided to follow one of the routes I did, and he went and became a process server. And I think that lasted about 3 months, and he determined that that really wasn't for him, dealing with the people he was trying to serve, or dealing with the law offices themselves. And he didn't pursue it at all. And I was very happy that he wasn't in his first or second year of law school and decided that. And I've seen that happen also. I have one of my friends that I met while I was in law school who had dropped out of law school just a few years before that, after his second year of law school. And he became, he was a very successful pharmaceutical rep for years, but he took him years to pay off that law school experience. And he has a bad taste in his mouth from having tried it because it really didn't fit him. So my suggestion is, anybody considering it, go take a test run. Go sit in a courtroom and see what attorneys actually do. Go talk to attorneys that work in the different areas of law that you might be interested. I've sat in courtrooms out of necessity because that's where I had to be at the time. And I've observed attorneys that are passionate and excited about it. And I've also observed attorneys that would rather be out with a shovel in their hand or doing, almost anything else but this work. So you'll enjoy it more, and you'll be better at it if it truly is something that you want to do.
You just dropped some amazing just career advice in general. From the burnout is a real hot word, I guess, in the media nowadays. And you touched on that beautifully. And a lot of people don't understand that blue collar background, I think, of just working in, service or just manual labor. And it is a great perspective to have, as the further you get down into kind of a more office career. And then also just what you said about, kind of meeting with people in the industry and getting a better idea. A lot of people don't do that when they, decide a major. And I think it's extremely important to, kind of get a, lay of the land. And you think that'd be kind of taught in schools almost, but it's not. So that's just great advice. And I want to thank you for that. Is there anything else that you kind of want to leave off on, or, further words of advice or anything along those lines?
Well, I hesitate. You can see by my white beard that I've been around a while, and I could talk about some of these different things for days. So I don't want to do that, but let me just, the word of advice is that I would have is find something that you enjoy. And, the old saying is, if you love what you do, you'll never actually work a day in your life. And so find something you like to do or love to do and find a way to make a living out of it. Today, with technology, the different avenues that we have for commerce, almost anything can be a business. One of my good friends, his oldest daughter, has a business making and selling bolo ties. And my wife and I looked at each other when he told us that's what she was doing and just said, how can that be a business? How can that work? I mean, and yet I just saw somebody the other day with one of her ties and wearing one of her ties. I have a granddaughter who is an artist and entrepreneur, and she has decided that she's open to shop. She deals with people online, and the biggest thing is that she creates, and that's what she wants to be doing, and she's making a living out of it. So there's so many different ways to make a living. And the other part of that is you don't have to keep up with anybody else. You have to satisfy yourself. And if you are satisfied with who you are, you're a success, regardless of what others may think or see.
How can people get in touch with you, get in contact with you, find you?
Well, one way people can get in touch with me is through our company, Oakview Law Group. That's ovlg.com is our website. People can also get hold of me through my personal email. If you don't mind, I can put that out there. I like everybody else, sort through them every morning and every evening to see what's real and what's not. But I'm at Lyle, that's lowercase LYLEDS, and the numbers 56 at yahoo.com. And that's either through the company website or through my personal email are the two best ways to get a hold of me or to get a response from me. That's
perfect.
And
well, I want to thank you for coming on. You dropped a lot of great insight, just from a life perspective, as well as just being a practicing attorney for as long as you have. So I really appreciate you coming on once again.
Stephen, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for having me on. I really do appreciate it. And I hope that it's something that I've said something that your listeners can appreciate and maybe even utilize in their lives.
Well, I know for a fact I'm sending it to two of my friends that have thought about becoming lawyers, and one is practicing gonna start law school in Virginia. So I'm going to send him this one too. So I think you dropped some great knowledge, and I really appreciate it. But thank you, Lyle Solomon, once again.